right. Good morning, partners. Welcome to our DevOps keynote, Flow Engineering. My name is John Akbek-Pano. I'm a 3-year partner leading a service resilience practice, one of our future engineering pillars. It's a pleasure to have you all here today, and I'm excited to host this session. Today, we have the unique opportunity to engage in discussion that broaden our viewpoint and stretch our understanding. We are joined by distinguished guests today, a seasoned practitioner, and it's my honor to introduce our distinguished guest for today's session, Steve Pereira and Andrew Davis. They are here to discuss their new book, Flow Engineering, which is being released today here at Starbucks. It presents a set of practices around value stream mapping and unlocking innovation. They will return tomorrow for the workshop that I'm hosting as well. I'm also honored to introduce our moderator, our Senior Vice President, Courtney Kessler Hawkins. Thank you all for joining. I'm so excited about this session. Huge opportunity for us. Now please join me in welcoming our moderator, Courtney.
All right. Thanks, John. It's great to see you. Hi, everyone in the room and online. As John mentioned, I'm Courtney Kessler Hawkins, pronouns she, her, and L. And I have the honor of being part of the customer and retail technology team. And today I am thrilled to have Steve and Andrew here. John mentioned their book launched today, which I think is super amazing that we have them both here on their launch day. So round of applause for book launch. So I met Steve and Andrew through the DevOps Enterprise community, and I've been part of that community for a little over a decade. And I first got introduced to value stream management and the flow of value through that community. And it has really amplified my learning over my career. And I thank both of them because I've learned a lot from the two of them and being able to use them as sounding boards throughout my career journey. So I really appreciate that. I also had the opportunity to read the book. And I'm not going to do any sort of like spoiler alerts, but I will tell you that I wish I had had access to the tools and techniques and the practices that are outlined in the book. When I was introducing value stream mapping kind of early in my journey, it could be really challenging for people to see how that could unlock transparency to the flow of value, which, as Deb mentioned earlier, is part of our op model activation too, is really to accelerate how we deliver value to whomever our customers are. And so this book is going to provide unlocks to teams and organizations to be able to use, I would say, right-sized practices to get people introduced to the concepts and get on the journey earlier. So with that, I am going to introduce, I'll say a little bit about both Andrew and Steve and their bios before they come up. And I'm going to read it because I don't want to get it wrong. Okay, so Andrew Davis is a DevOps and Salesforce specialist. So for those of you who work on the Salesforce platform, Andrew's your person. He's currently the Chief Product Officer at AutoRabbit, where he's focused on enabling security, rapid innovation for the most advanced Salesforce customers. I'd put us in that category. And his favorite drink's up here. I was going to read it, but it's right there for you. And then Steve Pereira, he's spent over 2 decades improving the visibility and flow of work across organizations. He serves as the lead consultant for Visible Value Stream Consulting, as a board advisor to the Value Stream Management Consortium, chair of the, this is my favorite one that I was struggling to say earlier, of the OASIS Value Stream Management Interoperability Technical Committee, and co-founder of the Flow Collective to bring flow-focused professionals together. So favorite beverage, double espresso, and I'd love to welcome Steve and Andrew to the stage.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Courtney. And we're really, really, really delighted to be here. Thanks so much for throwing a launch party for our book. Very generous of you. And this is one of these audiences where I never have to worry about you falling asleep, because I know you're all thoroughly caffeinated this morning. It's a big perk of presenting here at Starbucks. So here we are. Yeah. So this is the title of the book that's launching today, Flow Engineering, also the title of the talk. And consider this to be your too long didn't read version of the book. So if you get through this session, you'll kind of have the overview and the sense for the essence of the book. So yeah, delighted to have. Let me kick it off by just saying that the essence of the book, and I really appreciate Courtney's introduction to the benefits of value stream mapping and so forth, but the essence of the book is dealing with the problem of scale. And so we have organizations in our world today that are of a larger scale than anyone's ever imagined. There's companies in the world with more than 1 million employees, certainly lots with hundreds of thousands and so forth. Scale brings many, many benefits, but it also brings many challenges, some of which are a bit subtle and a bit invisible. So just to take this one example of a research study that was done by Microsoft and Facebook, to simplify it, basically the pink line is the net productivity of a team going up as you get more and more people on the team, the net productivity going up. The blue line is the contribution of each individual contributor to that overall productivity. So the essence of that can be summarized in this one phrase: teamwork is best. Organizations accomplish much more working in teams than they ever could alone, but it's often not our best work, that there's a variety of factors that undermine the ability of individuals to contribute effectively to that team and to stay coordinated as things scale up. And that's really the essence of the problem we're aiming to solve with the book and with this talk. So
thanks. So this is something that I think everybody is pretty familiar with, that gets borne out in survey data all the time. But one example, this recent survey from PlanView, who purchased TaskTop and have been in the value stream space for ages, analyzed 3,600 value streams, and what they found was that engineers in the value streams are only spending 8% of their time delivering work that makes it out to customers. And that could be anything from stuff that gets stuck and brought back for analysis or just gets canceled. But there's so much waste in that process. And that's kind of what we want to attack: the waste, the friction, the impediments to contribution.
Viscosity, as Courtney called it.
Viscosity, exactly. So what is this stuff that gets in the way? What is that other 92% of the time that we're taking working through value streams? So we have everything from lack of clarity from the get-go. We have scope creep, expanding the area that we need to track and the cognitive load that we have to manage. We have bottlenecks and queues that introduce delays. We have dependencies that get in the way and tie us to other requirements. We have rework. We have technical debt. We have escalations and interruptions. We have all these things that are constantly getting in the way of getting things done. And that's just the stuff that we can see that's apparent and obvious. But there's far more pervasive and continuous impacts that are invisible to us. So we have different perspectives from different contributions, different contributors, different leaders, different partners, and suppliers. They all have their own view of the problem and the opportunity that rarely get reconciled. And then we have different goals. Everybody has their own targets, their own milestones, their own goals. that impact where they're looking and what they're considering and their incentives. And then we have these different scopes: short-term, long-term, big picture, detail. And these rarely get brought into alignment between contributors, leaders, and everybody who's involved in delivering value.
Okay, so if we combine, and I don't want to be standing right in the middle of the slides. I'm not sure how I'm doing in terms of obstructing your view, but we also have to hand off, so I'm cognizant of that. So we have what you could call planned initiatives, for example, business objectives and improvement objectives that combine to create this huge backlog of changes. That's the intentional work that we want to get done. But in combination with that, we're always having to balance that intentional work with things like fires you've got to put out, defects, technical debt, and so forth, that create this another kind of backlog, a backlog of constant distractions. And so you're basically having to work with this collection of both intentional improvement opportunities as well issues that you're trying to mitigate, combining. And then it's in the broader context of needing to do more with less. There's typically never enough time, never enough people, resources, and so forth. Continually improving quality, delivering more value, keeping talent, each partner happy, and so forth, needing to go faster. So the big question combining all of these is, how do we do that? How do we balance across all of these competing priorities? It's a legitimately challenging topic. So one way to think about this is think about this path from the challenge that we're trying to accomplish to what would it take to accomplish a win on that. And so I want to outline there's a 5-step process we'd need to think about, at least in the abstract, to accomplishing all of these things. The first is always start with a focus on value. What's the net value that we can deliver with any particular improvement initiative, any particular piece of work that we can do? Are we clear about the benefit that this is bringing versus the cost? The second challenge we need to accomplish is understanding the current flow. What is the current state of our work and our work process? The next is identifying the obstacles. What's slowing us down? What's impeding our ability to deliver that value? Next, defining the opportunities. What could we accomplish if we were free from some of these obstacles? And then finally, what's our path to get there? And so we're giving you this as sort of a 5-step overview of the outline, because it's this framework that we've mapped the essence of the book to. And we'll explain shortly the approach in 5 mapping exercises to accomplish that. So let me start, I guess, by talking about the one map. We're talking about value stream mapping. That's one kind of mapping. But the map that every organization in the world already has is the org chart. The org chart is, I argue that it's the most universally updated document in any organization that explains who the organization is, how they work. Every organization's got an org chart, and it helps make sure that nobody's getting lost. Everybody's got a manager, and there's some clarity on how decisions are made. Org charts are very important. They're basically a network structure that explains how all the people in the organization connect together. But one of the challenges that arises in the org chart is that you see your part of the org chart. You have visibility into the area that's your area of focus, not necessarily the rest of it. But when you think about what does it take to actually deliver value, what does it take to actually get work done, productive, valuable work done, the path to that value tends to snake through the org chart in some weird way, right? It starts with maybe somebody over in sales or marketing or customer research, and then they have a hypothesis, and let's figure out how to work through the organization to get this product developed, delivered, marketed, and so forth. And this is what we call a value stream. And so if you're not already familiar, what we're talking about when we talk about value streams is these paths that work their way through the organization to actually getting work done. Now, even within a value stream, we also typically have fairly siloed visibility. There's only a small subset that we really understand very well. My background's in software development. I would always tend to be aware of, how the software development process is unfolding, not so aware of the marketing process, almost not aware at all of the sales process and so forth that follow on from that. Now, the view of the org that you take will determine the outcomes. And you get profoundly different effects when if the org chart is the primary structure, the primary map of where you work, what are you doing, who are you serving, one of the consequences of that is that people tend to be very inwardly focused in an org chart. The org chart, one of the characteristics is that the customer is nowhere on the org chart. They're just not on there. And so the only conclusions that are natural from looking at an org chart is maybe how I could ascend up the org chart or whose approval I need to get something done and so forth. It creates naturally very internal focus on your work. And that literally shapes our mental model of what are we doing every day when we show up to work, we fight traffic and come in, what are we doing? Now, if we move to the idea of a value stream view, looking at the path to actually getting value delivered, what is essential about that is that it's always value delivered for whom? Always based on what request, what hypothesis. It's implicitly based around the customer. And so there really is, I believe, a tension between these two mental models of what am I doing at work? Who do I serve? Am I serving my boss? Am I serving the customer? When we think about what is a value stream, working backwards here from customer satisfaction, typically it's a set of processes, something like this, right? You know, from eventual customer enablement, if we're in the software space, there may be documentation, training, and so forth we need to accomplish. Originating in a business hypothesis, and typically when you're, if you're embedded in a team that builds, for example, a mobile app for Starbucks, there's this ongoing iterative process. You're always rolling out new features and new capabilities, and it's that iterative cycle of work that allows for learning and adaptation. And that's what shifts this value stream from being effectively a linear process to being a cyclical process, a feedback loop. And so that's really what we want to emphasize is that continuous adaptation. Now, these streams are scattered throughout the organization. They're things like product development and addressing support issues, service requests, new hire onboarding, long lists of all of these different capabilities. And you can see that these cover every single capability that the organization has. Every person who receives benefit in any way from the organization is, every process of creating benefit for customers, or internal or external customers, is represented by some value stream.
So one of the things that people often start with when they become aware of value streams is, how do we see these value streams? Are we making them up? Are we designing them? How do we find them so that we can map them and then improve them? And so a couple of starting points that are really helpful are thinking about a target outcome. What is perhaps the moonshot that you're aiming towards, or the next product launch, or the next big release? And then maybe you want to segment your organization by product and service and look at the value streams that are creating and producing those products and services. You can also work from a customer journey and say, what are the streams that deliver those milestones that move a customer through their journey as seamlessly as possible? And all of these things are underpinned and delivered by value streams. But the key really is working backwards. We had the question in the last session about how do you actually get started with moonshots? The moonshot is the target, and then working backwards is key. And the question of how do you get started and how do you think about enabling the creation of these outcomes is really important. But for us to actually improve the flow of experimentation or development or production, we have to be able to see this flow so that we can start to scrutinize the performance and improve where it's going to make a big difference. So we start from that ultimate delivery of value, and we start to work backwards. We will start to see this value stream, right? It's essentially what happens to deliver that, and then what happens to deliver that part, and what happens to deliver that, all the way back to your initial hypothesis or the first step in creating value. And that's really important to see this entire end-to-end flow because, again, we always have siloed visibility, which leads to a siloed focus on improvement, right? We're going to be looking for solutions where we can where we can see very clearly, which is often right in front of us or right at our feet, which is not necessarily where our constraint or our biggest opportunity lies. So value streams and value stream mapping really enable this holistic visibility of the entire flow and then give us tools to uncover these constraints that are holding us back from higher performance, which means more swings at the plate, more opportunities, more failures, more learning, lower cost of failure, and all these things that we hope to benefit from. So when we're talking about flow, you're going to hear about flow from a lot of different perspectives over the next couple days. And our kind of very familiar context for flow is this individual flow state that was kind of introduced by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi many years ago. And the key there is this marriage between challenge and skill, keeping us engaged, but in a state of continuous progress, right? So that we can feel like we're actually improving, we're getting somewhere, right? Progress is really, really important. But in a large organization and at scale, we can't just have individuals in flow without having collective flow. We have to have this holistic flow of work across the organization that is facilitating the handoffs, the relay race where the baton very smoothly passes from role to role and function to function. And so the flow there is extremely consequential, right? And we really can't have one without the other. We have to be, at the collective level, minimizing delays and minimizing friction. And then at the individual level, we have to maximize engagement and then maximize the performance of the individual. This is a symbiotic relationship. You really need both. And you need to be enabling individual flow by enabling collective flow and vice versa. Because if we're in a collective context and we're constantly interrupted, as individuals, we're never able to drop into that flow state, or we can't maintain that state for very long. So we have both a micro context for flow and a macro context for flow at the collective level.
So when we talk about flow engineering, the title of the book, that's what we're really trying to do is figure out, I've been reflecting a lot on the title, flow engineering, thinking about it today with the launch of the book. There's these two very different, very dramatically different sides. Flow implies something that's in constant change, right? It's in movement, it's all about change and so forth. So living things are in the nature of flow. For example, when we talk about the flow state, it's very much an internal, constantly changing experience. Whereas engineering, it's got this, this structured aspect, the logical aspect. So it relates, there's lots of implications, including the two hemispheres of the brain and the way they work together and so forth. One of the things that Steve and I came to quite early in our discussion about this, is something that we've called the elements of action. And we've organized the book around this idea that if we really want to enable flow, meaning both the individual flow states for individuals, both an internal flow state for individuals, as well collective flow, what's necessary for that is some level of clarity. And the greater your clarity, the more you can enable flow. And by clarity, I mean, what am I supposed to be doing? How do I fit into the whole? What are people expecting from me? What am I expecting from others? And so forth. And even preceding that, there's a sense of value that we need. Like, why am I doing this? Why am I being asked to work on this thing? And that these three need to come together to create effective action. So we call them the elements of action. And so these three align with this idea of targeting, which is, you see here in the upper left. Targeting is, what is the value that we're trying to accomplish? What's the goal? What's the outcome? And so forth. And then understanding where are we today? What's the landscape? What's the challenge? And so forth. And then acting. And that's how these three line up. These apply at the level of individuals. They apply at the level of teams. They apply at the level of organizations. It's kind of a fractal approach that's applicable at a small scale, medium scale, large scale. So one of the things that we came to a conclusion on very early on is the power of visualization, the power of visual mapping to host collective conversations. And so when Courtney was talking about how she had been running value stream mapping exercises herself quite early on, and I know others in the organization like Emmanuel and so forth have been running value stream mapping exercises within the organization. Why is this seemingly simple technique so effective and so helpful? One of the things you're doing is that you're visualizing. So if you look at the flow of activity here, it's externalizing the understanding of many, many individuals in a way that can be seen by everybody. And what you're doing is you're building collective clarity. And so there's many, many different benefits to that process. You're creating engagement. Everybody who's involved in the process is actively contributing their ideas, giving feedback on those of others. There's shared context and ownership, what Steve calls the IKEA effect, which is that if you built a bit of furniture yourself, you tend to value that at 70% higher than if you just bought it pre-made, right? So I've got some IKEA furniture at home that I'm very, very proud of. So when you create the value stream map yourself, it's yours, right? It's done by you and your team and so forth. You create alignment naturally because everybody's operating with a shared understanding of the world, a shared understanding of what's going on next. It's customized. It's not like, oh, I downloaded this template for exactly what we're supposed to do. I read this blog article. I think we're supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z. There's also greater learning retention. So because it's an active process of creating the value stream map, people think about it more than if they just get this delivered to them from corporate office. And it's also remote friendly. And finding ways to keep people engaged in the remote world is very challenging. I said finding ways to keep people engaged in the remote world is very challenging, right? Because we were talking about yesterday, when we're working remotely, it's so hard not to multitask. It's so hard. I pride myself on having a pretty good attention span, pretty focused. But it's like a sheer act of will to try to pay attention, in a webinar or something like that. So shout out to everybody who's doing that right now. We're not making this up. Many of you hopefully have heard of ThoughtWorks. It's a consulting company that really is the source for a huge portion of the most innovative ideas in the whole world of software development. So they publish a document called the ThoughtWorks Radar every year that says, okay, we think these trends you should watch out, this might be incoming, these you should definitely adopt. Number one on their list of things that you should absolutely adopt is what they call path to production mapping. And I know that's a slogan here in Starbucks about how can you create full confidence in your path to production. That's exactly what we're talking about here, mapping out what's the path to delivering these capabilities. And that brings us to these 5 maps of flow engineering.
So in service of our elements of action, right, working backwards from what do we want to achieve? We want to enable flow, and then the prerequisite of building clarity and then targeting and aligning and focusing by identifying value that kind of constrains our scope to something manageable and something that we can all clearly understand. We have 5 maps that go beyond just value stream mapping because in our experience, diving right into a value stream map is very challenging without laying the groundwork of getting agreement and alignment and visibility into a target outcome that everybody can understand and everyone's bought in on. That scope definition from the very beginning, and you can get it sometimes from a charter, you can get it from brainstorming in certain cases, but outcome mapping that we'll describe here as our first map really is dedicated to that purpose of establishing just what do we want to do, and what are we trying to accomplish, and what are the things that we need to consider along the way. And it takes you everything from zero or chaos to, okay, we're on the same page and we know where we're going. And then through value stream mapping, you understand the current state of flow and what's happening. Also the constraint that's primarily impacting your flow and your performance. And then dependency mapping is a way of digging into that constraint to understand why is that such a problem? What's involved in that challenge? What might we be able to address in that constraint? That takes us to future state mapping that helps us visualize and identify what a new and improved process could look like, what kind of changes might be necessary to improve performance, and get people excited about what's possible in the near term. And then the flow roadmap is really the roadmap for improvement. We have product roadmaps, we have marketing roadmaps, we have all kinds of roadmaps, but we rarely see roadmaps for workflow and performance improvement across teams. The flow roadmap is a way of laying that out clearly so that everyone knows what we're going to do with what we discovered and the opportunity that's ahead of us. So what happens when we start to do this? We have increased throughput, we lower mean time to repair, we increase our deployment frequency, we lower lead time. These are DORA metrics. These are metrics that a lot of people pay attention to, but they're really just indicators of kind of the lagging effects of these improvement efforts. There's a lot of short-term effects to psychological safety, alignment, visibility, confidence, and collaboration that happen much quicker than these. But this is kind of the scaled opportunity that's available when you're able to improve performance of your value streams. So some of the key outcomes that we will see are at a macro level. We're enabling flow by bringing people together to actually improve measurable change in performance across the organization. We're building clarity, which increases confidence, but also alignment and a sense of unity in the organization. And then that identification of value is so important because of all the things that we could be working on, it brings us back to what is most consequential, what's most important, what's going to make the biggest difference in the organization.
Right. So all of that's a little bit background, context, explaining what are value streams, why are they important, the importance, the benefits of value stream mapping. So what we'll explain now are the actual process of bringing people together for mapping. And I often think about these mapping exercises as collaborative visual conversations. Collaborative visual conversations. They're collaborative. People are working together to create something. It's visual. It's a visualization of each person's individual understanding combined into a collective understanding. And it's a conversation. It's emergent. It's unfolding. Like a conversation, you never quite know where it's going to go. You start on a certain topic, and it evolves and unfolds. And so there's a ton of insights that are uncovered through this process. So if you take, for example, a value stream mapping exercise for a mobile app, one of the key people to have involved, directly or indirectly, is an executive sponsor. That having that kind of air cover for the discussions is critically important, partly because sometimes you uncover challenging issues. Sometimes you uncover, dependencies on other teams outside of your immediate organization and so forth. So you want to make sure you have a champion who can help support the effort and ideally be directly involved so they can watch the conversation unfolding and be caught and be up to speed basically as it evolves. You'll want a facilitator. And one of the things that made us most delighted was hearing that Starbucks, you guys you're already off and running with the flow engineering process. Emmanuel, for example, was at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in the fall where Steve and I ran a gamified value stream mapping exercise. We gave handouts, said, take these handouts, go off, do this yourself. And you say that and you're kind of hopeful, and then the odds that people actually do it are, not so high. But you guys did it. You guys did it. You got 50 people, is my understanding, 50 people involved in this process of value stream mapping. And that's really what we're looking for, is enabling armies of facilitators. It's great to have some professional facilitators like Steve who could help with this process, but we want to make sure that, and that's especially powerful if it's a high stakes discussion, very large scale, but for small scale stuff, this is something everybody can get started with. And then you'll want to have representation from every different aspect of the process. So whoever's involved in the value stream, so this planning, designing, through enabling process, you want some representative stakeholder from every aspect of the value stream to be there to sort of speak to their aspect of things. You don't want to group more than maybe 12 people. That's the biggest size, otherwise it becomes unwieldy. But you want people who are representative stakeholders. And so then stepping through the 5 maps. So in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see this depiction of these 5 maps. And I just want to give you a visualization of what each of these maps looks like. And as Steve said, The value stream mapping itself is kind of the core, but before you get to the value stream mapping, there's a process called outcome mapping, and we'll go into this a little later in this session. We'll have a depiction of that. But you start with what is the key outcome you're seeking to accomplish. And let's say you want a 2-week lead time, reduce your lead time to 2 weeks. You then begin to enumerate what are the benefits of accomplishing that. And I can't understate or I can't overstate the power of getting the group thinking about why a certain outcome would be beneficial. Why would you want to accomplish that? And then listing out the obstacles. And we'll go into this in more detail when we do a dramatization of this later. But you're always going to have some people on the team who are more oriented towards why this wouldn't work. Like, why this wouldn't work. What are the obstacles? What are the challenges that might make this difficult? And so forth. So we want to make sure that we give a place to park those concerns so we can be aware of them. And then next steps. What's next? What are the considerations we need to make? So that's outcome mapping. What that does, it sets clarity on the overall value of the initiative you're trying to accomplish. So the second stage is the actual value stream mapping exercise. And each of these might take 2 hours or so to run one of these mapping exercises. 2 hours for the outcome mapping, 2 for the value stream mapping. So the value stream mapping starts with laying out what are the sequence of steps that need to be accomplished to deliver this valuable outcome. The primary metric you need to layer onto that is timing. How long does it take to accomplish each of the steps? But then within that, what's the waiting period, the hold, the pause between each of these steps? Because often that can add up to even more than the working time. The waiting time in many, many, many processes is longer than the working time. And then within that, try to narrow in or zoom in on what is the major constraint. So if we add up the total time that it would take to complete this process, it might be 51 days, of which the wait time is 15 days. Highlight the bit that is the greatest challenge. Highlight the place where most of that waiting is taking place, which in this case is that early part of the process. And this is what we call highlighting the constraint, identifying the constraint. The next stage is deep diving into that constraint to try to understand why does it take 3 weeks, give or take a week, to accomplish this stage. And that's where you want to zoom in. And we've designed these maps to be fairly time efficient. So you just map with enough clarity to identify your likely bottleneck. Then you zoom in on the bottleneck, figure out the process there. What are your wait times there? Why do you have wait times? What's your main constraint and obstacle there? And then you get into, and then having accomplished that sort of visualization, you see here, having accomplished that clear state of the current, clear vision of the current state, you can then zoom in, well, you can then start to imagine what a better workflow would look like.
So that brings us into reimagining with a future state value stream map. And what we want to do there is target Kaizen or improvement efforts on these specific inflection points where we've seen the biggest opportunities. Sometimes that's upstream of our constraint because our constraint is due to something that happens early or should happen and doesn't happen. Or we're disorganized or we're not prepared. We don't have full kit, as Goldratt would mention. We're not prepared to deliver when and how we need to. And so we can identify these opportunities, and that really sets us up for road mapping these specific actions. So when we think about a roadmap, this is a very basic structure that just incorporates 3 time horizons. We don't want to be specific about when these are. These are kind of t-shirt sizes that represent for us, what are we going to do immediately? What has to wait until those things are out of the way? And then what's off into the distance, which again, allows us to focus, right? We're not trying to do everything at once. So we can plot these specific interventions. And then what's valuable really about, I find a flow roadmap is we try to understand how are we going to know that we're headed in the right direction? How do we know if what we're doing is paying off or we're making progress? And so identifying measures of progress makes it very clear that we can measure as we go and understand that we're on the right track. And then another critical dimension here is ownership, because it's very easy for us How many people have been in a retro that's, you come up with all these ideas and then you leave and nothing happens because nobody signed up to say, I'm actually going to see that through. And this is very, very important to outline for now, but looking at these later time horizons, we can be a little bit more ambiguous because we can figure it out later. Again, we really want to be lightweight and simple with this wherever possible. So one differential factor of flow engineering versus what you might have encountered with value stream mapping or other frameworks is that we really want to make this easy to start, which is part of the motivation for the game version of this that we're going to be reintroducing at the workshop tomorrow. So if you want to go through this with us, that's what we're going to introduce. We really want this to be an easy on-ramp for not just flow engineering, but other efforts. If you're trying to adopt another framework, if you're trying to spin up team topologies or OKRs, this is something that could make it easier for you to get to. And then we're building alignment by sharing this view amongst all the contributors and stakeholders who are involved. And then it's engaging because we're all co-creating it together. This is not something that gets handed down from a mountain or an ivory tower. It's created from the ground up, which makes it a little bit more appealing than a mandate or something that gets delivered in a slide deck. So just to recap the entire path, we've got our 5 maps that take us through our elements of action. Initially identifying value, then building clarity with an understanding of the current state and what is impacting that current state most significantly. And then we're enabling flow by describing a future state and our flow roadmap to make it actionable. And as a result, we're bringing perspectives together. So before, when we had those separate perspectives, they're now becoming more unified. We're unifying everyone's sense of the target and what we're trying to achieve. And we're unifying the scope that everyone's discussing. We have now, next, later, and everybody is on the same page about what we're trying to do at this point in time, what's going to wait, and how all this fits together. So really quickly, because this is a busy slide, lots of things happen as a result of these efforts. But you'll see, hopefully you'll see with the second part of the presentation and the workshop tomorrow what sort of things come out of these efforts. But we're very, very pleased to be here launching the book with you. And we're very excited to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your questions, and to take you through a specific case. I think we're going to do Q&A right now.
So there's a chance for a micro break. For example, the stand up, stretch your legs, refresh blood flow to your brain and so forth. Caffeine alone is not sufficient to keep your mind functioning clearly. But we've got a break for maybe 10 minutes, sort of a micro break, during which we want to have Q&A here, and then we'll come back and actually illustrate this with a case study. So,
all right. Thank you both. I know that we were going to have Q&A online and then also in the room, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Is there anybody in the room that has a question? All right. There's a mic coming to you.
So, sounds great. However, I'm curious because how is this different from product management, the agile concept, the DevOps concept? I don't want to kind of minimize it, but it sounds like you're repackaging everything. But how is this fundamentally change how we should be thinking, kind of putting it in action, right?
This is a great question. So if I can recap, how is this different and not just a repackaging of a bunch of stuff that we already know? And, I think that primarily this is largely a repackaging of a bunch of principles and practices and initiatives and efforts that we've all heard about and we've tried and succeeded with various degrees of success over many decades, put together in a start to finish prescriptive process without a prescriptive outcome. So what we're trying to do with flow engineering is marry the benefits of prescription with generation and forge a middle path between this is what good looks like, these are the steps that you can take to get started and make progress, visible progress. But it's really collecting a lot of these principles and practices. For instance, in the book, we debated collecting a bunch of principles that would reinforce the material of what we're talking about here and kind of the underpinning aspects that support flow engineering. And we ended up just using lean principles, 5 classic lean principles, because we're not trying to reinvent here. We're trying to make it more accessible and easier to start. So it really is about repackaging in a more approachable, friendly way for folks who, we hear a lot, yeah, we know we should be value stream mapping. It is great. We would love to be doing it. We can't find the time. We don't really know how to start. It's uncomfortable. All of these aspects that hold people back from getting started. So we're really aiming at that on-ramp to make all the things that we already know a little bit more accessible, a little bit easier to start. I hope that answers the question.
We have a question online. How would an organization implement a flow engineering team? And would project management or a workflow group be the primary owners of process and objectives?
Steve.
One of the things that we address in the book is the idea of a flow engineering enabling team, which is one of the enabling teams are one of the team types introduced in team topologies, but it's really about facilitating improvement in other teams. So really this service-based interaction mode where a group of practitioners could go in and align with another team and help them unblock flow or get out of a tough situation. And they could be doing any number of things. But that model of kind of facilitation is what we leverage in the book as a suggested pattern for flow engineering in large organizations. And the value in that is you get these sort of bee model of buzzing around to these different flowers of teams and cross-pollinating ideas and practices, and here's what worked over here. And I don't quite know how to solve this problem, but this team over here solved something similar, so maybe we try that. And so an enabling team can kind of float around the organization, pair with existing teams, get them out of a tough situation, take that learning and go spread it around. And so they are leveling up the entire organization without embedding a flow engineer in every team. We had this problem with DevOps and DevOps teams where folks thought, okay, well, I have 200 product teams now, I need 200 DevOps engineers, one for each team. And now we've swung that pendulum back to, okay, now we need a platform team and we won't have any DevOps engineers. And so to avoid this pendulum swinging and the enormous expense of embedding capabilities in teams, we think the enabling team is a great pattern for that. And it could really grow out of any existing set of capabilities and practices in organizations. So if your PMO is primarily concerned with unblocking productivity and performance and workflow, that could be a natural fit. If they're incentivized to move those metrics, that sounds like great alignment. It could be agile coaches who are trying to unblock flow in teams. We don't have any prescriptive table that says, your old title was this and your new title is this. We don't think that works, but these are universal practices that you're already doing in many different contexts. If you want to assemble them into something like an enabling team, that's a great way to kind of formalize and build that capability that should fit into your current topology pretty well.
Great, thank you. And we've got about 500 people online watching.
Ooh, another question in the back here. Yeah, fantastic. Hey, everybody.
Hi, I'm Janet. You had talked about the value stream, and you talked about the key, and I'm not using your words, but the key folks that are in blue dots, right? We have a very distributed architecture here, so there are actually multiple sets of blue dots. And my original question was, how do you handle that? Or what have you seen as a way to ensure that we have the right optimized flow? But maybe that's the team you just talked about, the enabling team. But wanted to hear about your thoughts on that.
So this is something that had come up in discussions earlier in preparation for this session, that I was told that within Starbucks there's a lot of dependencies. There's a lot of places where you've got to call out to the security team or the compliance team or this team or that team and so forth. Typically, though, you will still have some core group of the organization that's able to see from one end of the process to the other end. Like, okay, this is the request we're getting coming in. This is what we need to deliver. And so there's some core people who are involved in the central process, even if they have massive call outs and so forth. So I would say start with that core team who sort of represents the main value stream. And then the purpose of the value stream mapping is to get a high level, sort of a low fidelity, low granularity picture of what's the process look like today. And then to identify what's the primary constraint first. And so if there's one of these dependencies, one of these call outs on another team that ends up being a 2-week wait period, and that's the long pole in the tent, so to speak, then you zoom in on that and you highlight that. And then you might have a secondary value stream mapping exercise, what we call dependency mapping, to just say, okay, well, what's happening during this 2-week process when we make a request out and it's being processed? How can we address that? Can we initiate the request earlier? Can we add more information up front so there's not so much back and forth and so forth? And do kind of a nested model. That would be my primary thought on that. Because again, you can't necessarily bring 80 people into a room. You're not going to get a productive conversation. So there's a human scale to this thinking process. It has to be, small enough group of people to create a coherent picture that everybody can understand. And then you can zoom in on the areas that are focus points, problematic.
And one of the other things that I think is a great byproduct of this effort is just building some visibility into how complicated the current flow is. So by trying to represent the value stream and failing and showing, branches off in all these places and circles back, and then we do all this rework and all this stuff gets canceled and we shrink the scope and expand it 9 times. That's all relevant information that, although it's painful to kind of lay it all out there, if we don't do that, we are really kidding ourselves when it comes to continuous improvement and improvement efforts. Like, if we can't see what's actually happening, then we're just going to pick these vanity efforts, these things that are low-hanging fruit, that are sitting right in front of us, that are micro optimizations. And meanwhile, there could be a massive constraint that may actually be easier to address or more consequential, or get people more excited. And it could be just outside of our view, right? So I think, for these very long paths, we always try to work backwards through something like a retro. You could build this into your retrospective practice of, our last big release, how did it go? And what was the flow of work? Where did it break down? And this can be very conversational. It can be very abstract. But, where you start to see those signals, like this, I remember this was really painful. That can be the point where you dig down and you really look at, okay, what really happened there? Where did it really go sideways? But, this is something that is made a lot easier when you start to enable things like self-service and platforms so that you have less handoffs and you have less of this wandering path through organizations, but you have to start somewhere and you have to start where you are. So hopefully, that's simple and painless enough with simple mapping so that you can do that without being overwhelmed and, just going back to the status quo.
How much more time do we have?
So we have 30 minutes, I think, on the clock.
Yeah,
So
so
we
we
should go to the next
our
part.
last.
Move to the case study?
Are you,
Yeah, we'll
you
jump
ready to
into
move on?
our.
Okay,
We'll jump into part 2.
awesome. Then we'll
All
do
right.
more Q&A at the end.
yes,
Okay.
more Q&A at the end.
Awesome.
Thanks, Chris.
And books.
Okay,
Free
so
books for those who stay.
Books, yeah, just a couple of logistical points. The schedule that you've been handed, the paper schedule, if you've got one of those, some subset of those have a sticker on them with an animal. I saw a bear, I saw an eel, so if your paper has a sticker on it, you just won yourself a free copy of Flow Engineering. So you can get that in the back at the sound desk there. And then tomorrow we have a workshop on this topic that'll actually give you a chance to be hands-on. So look for that on the schedule tomorrow. I think it's 10 a.m., 11 a.m., something like that. So sign up for that if you want. Steve.
all right, so one of the things that we really want to do with presenting this material is make it real and make it tangible. So we want to walk through an example case, and sort of Sharon, our product leader, working for a fictional company called Bolt Global. It's kind of an aggregation of a lot of experiences that we've had with flow engineering and a lot of the cases that we see. So what we want to illustrate with this specific case is bringing people's perspectives together, this act of reconciling different viewpoints to create alignment and visibility and sharing the same context. And then we want to not just enable things happening, but effective action, right? These actions that are connected to target outcomes that we want to enable and create and build. And then we want to make mutually beneficial situations, right? We have dependencies. We want to make sure that everyone wins when we come together and we're trying to drive continuous improvement. Improvement is best when everybody benefits and we're not just asking someone else to go out of their way, because we know everyone has a million things to do. So to enable effective action, you have to make sure that it is beneficial to everyone and everyone can see the big picture of why are we doing this compared to everything else that we could be doing. So Sharon has a very similar subset challenge that we introduced earlier. Of course, the company's under a lot of pressure. That leads to a lot of things that need to get done. And it manifests itself in a huge backlog of things that she needs to deliver. And she's facing internal pressure to do this faster than ever. And so the question again, how do we do this? How do we enable this higher level of performance? So again, who's involved? If we look at our typical scope, we want representation from across the value stream. We want an executive sponsor to support this and make sure that when we reveal opportunities, they get budget and support and time. And we have somebody with leadership visibility to make sure that we're aligning to what's most important to overall objectives. And so we'll start by mapping outcomes.
As Steve mentioned, often people just talk about value stream mapping, but I think this was born from his hard-won experience originally, that people dive into value stream mapping without having a prior sense of what's the key outcome that they really want to accomplish with that process. So it's always important to have that high-level, big picture of what it is that you're trying to accomplish first. So within outcome mapping, the first of these 5 mapping exercises, we start, in fact, with a preliminary, which is called outcome discovery, which is basically you bring these key stakeholders together, and then you just surface what are the things that are on everybody's mind already. So what are the pain points the team's experiencing? What are the goals that we're inheriting from organizational goals or other goals internally generated from the team? What questions are arising? What ideas do people have? And you basically just bring those out, get them all out on the table. And this is what we're talking about by externalizing what's in people's minds. And this question arose earlier about, what's the difference between this and, product management and Agile and DevOps and so forth. All of those are rooted in very human levels of interaction. But sometimes when we think about DevOps, we think about, oh, I've got to automate this, automate that, and so forth. Very important, beneficial to automate. But you can't ever forget that human aspect of like, what's everybody thinking? What do we really want? And so we're really trying to facilitate that human communication. So you might surface this variety of concerns that the team has. And then often doing a voting exercise is very, very powerful. So these little orange dots are one technique you can use to do a simple voting mechanism. What's really the key concern on everybody's mind? In this case, this group has identified releasing twice as fast as the key consideration. So you take that then as the input to your outcome mapping exercise. And so the outcome mapping exercise is starting with an outcome, but then beginning to analyze that, to dissect that. Who cares, first of all? And so you want to think about the various stakeholders who would be impacted by this outcome. You know, external stakeholders, internal stakeholders. And then you want to begin to think about what are the benefits that they would receive by accomplishing that. And that is often really underemphasized in organizations. You get some kind of an organizational level directive, we need to do this, and so everybody's like, all right, we'll do the thing. Why are we doing this again? Right? And at an individual level, people are often kind of confused about why, what's the point, what's the purpose? And what that does is it deprives that individual of their intrinsic motivation. It deprives them of their clarity about what are we really trying to do and why and for whom and so forth. So then voting even for the benefits, to really zoom in on what are the key benefits that are most important, most impactful that you want to accomplish. Because that's going to be important both to motivate the team internally, but also to communicate if there's some improvement that comes out of this. Why are we making this improvement? What is it that we're really trying to accomplish? So the outcome mapping exercise, as we laid out earlier, just these very simple 4 columns. What's the primary outcome? What are the benefits? Why would we want to do this? And then what are the obstacles? I said this before, I'll say it again, that often you have voices on the team that are like positive, rah, 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 let's do this thing, we could do all the things. And then you have some skeptical voices on the team as well, some conservative voices, some naysayers, some people who are hesitant. Now, you might say, oh, these negative people, don't be so negative. But that's a very negative view, don't you think? So we need to be positive about negativity, right? So negativity is representing this honest view that there are risks. There's costs, there's risks, there's problems and so forth. Great, get those out on the table. Get everybody to explain all the reasons why they think this initiative is a terrible idea, why they think it's not going to work and so forth, and make that explicit, because each of those represents a risk that you need to avert. Right? It's not to say we don't do the initiative, but it's to identify the risks. So we identify all those obstacles and then identify what are the next steps, could be investigations that we need to take into consideration. What do we need to learn more about? And typically one of the main next steps is value stream mapping to actually identify what's the current state. So when it comes to mapping the value stream, our goal here is the subtitle is mapping the value stream not just to have a pretty picture, but to identify the constraint. What's really inhibiting our ability to deliver the value effectively? So the value stream mapping process, as we depicted earlier, starts with just laying out what are the stages that are involved in delivering value. Then, this is the case of Bolt Global and Sharon, they have identified that these are the stages involved in their process, and these are the times that they each take. Again, these are the waiting times. You identify those. And then you identify the hotspot. And so Sharon's team with Bolt Global, they identified that the environment setup process was the key constraint that's slowing down the whole delivery process. And what that does, that gives the clarity that's needed to do a deep dive on that process, to really try to understand through dependency mapping what's behind that environment setup process. So you begin to look at all of the various dependencies. Now, if you were to map out all of the dependencies on this process, it's a huge map. And that, to the question that was asked earlier about, there's so many people involved in the process, you don't need or want to map out everything. You don't need or want a perfect picture. You don't get higher grades for getting a perfect picture. What you want to do is to identify the key area that is your constraint. And that in this case is the infrastructure and environment management setup. And so if you look at where Sharon sits within the organization, actually, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So Sharon's now faced with this identification of a key focal point, but what do we're always aware that we have, before we can improve, we've got to get other people on board. We don't work on islands. We don't work in isolation. We work with many, many people, many, many dependencies and contributors. And so this connection of Sharon to all of her peers and colleagues in all these other departments can feel like that she's chained to all of these dependencies and that she's not actually able to influence anything outside of her own team and domain, her own function in the organization. So what we want to enable Sharon to do is to be able to reach out to these other areas where she finds constraints and have productive collaboration with them. So in her case, she's looking at environment setup, and what's her perception of the group and the function behind the platform that is governing her environment, managing the environment setup, and the source of her eternal distress. So she has this common narrative that is just constantly repeated by every experience that she has with this group, because they have their own thing going on. They have their own incentives, they have their own backlog, they have their own interruptions and distractions. So they always say no, they're constantly questioning us, and they have no sense of urgency because they've got their own things going on. And so what happens is we have to consider Kim's perspective. Kim is our infrastructure lead running platform. And Kim's perspective on this is that she has her own internal narrative. She has constant injection of work and demands from the organization, a huge backlog of technical debt. She gets interrupted and brought challenges and problems from people with insufficient context. She doesn't get the detail that she needs. And she's often asked to solve other people's problems that don't necessarily fit her capabilities, her mandate, her job description, and so on. And so what does this result in? Distraction from being pulled away from what she wants to focus on, her flow state, the disorientation of having to go and search for information or not having enough to act, and then the disengagement of just feeling like she's not able to do the things that she finds most important in the organization, and having to constantly compromise on her goals and what she feels she needs to get done. So we have this inherent conflict between Sharon and Kim.
And so this develops quite naturally. And when we talk about the problems of scale, one of the big problems of scale is you end up being very familiar with the people you work very closely with on an ongoing basis. And the further somebody else is from you in the organization, the more distant they seem, the more different they seem, the less easily you can empathize with what's actually happening. And so there's a sense in which we end up creating monsters out of these other groups, somewhere else in the organization. Oh no, it's the compliance team again. Here they come, demanding this and that and so forth. And you can end up with a situation where you feel like your department is surrounded by all these monsters, right? You're sort of in the middle trying to manage the infrastructure, and you're harried continuously by all of these, incoming demands that are just needling you and adding difficulty and so forth. And that's the power of mapping to build a shared perspective. And that's what we called earlier. I referred to this mapping process as collaborative visual conversations. And one of the things that happens in conversation is you begin to build a better mental model of the other person, a sort of theory of mind and more empathy on the other person. So you're mapping, in this case, Sharon took her initial challenge, which was that she was struggling with environment setup. She engaged with Kim, this infrastructure lead, in another round of mapping exercises, doing some outcome mapping to help establish with Kim what's the bigger picture of the goals we're trying to accomplish as an organization. And then as well, value stream mapping. So this is where we are, this is the challenge we have, what's going on in your team that that takes 2 weeks to fulfill this environment setup process.
So we're like converging context in this sense, right? So Kim can be brought into Sharon's view of what she's trying to accomplish and what's important to her, and add her own perspective of, well, this is my target outcome, right? These are the things that I'm dealing with. These are the obstacles that I see. These are the benefits that I'm pursuing. And these are the things that I'm working on. So they can align those two perspectives and bring them closer to mutually beneficial improvement.
And back to this topic of flow engineering, I mentioned that flow is the sort of dynamic, living, ever-changing, organic part of the process, and engineering is the structured, logical, designed aspect of things. So that's really what we're trying to do, is facilitate this organic merging of perspectives, sharing of perspectives through a very structured process. That's the engineering process, creating structured conversations that help establish alignment across teams. So we start with this idea of mapping, then having established that shared context, mapping the future state, envisioning what could things look like. And so this is, it's almost like massaging the organization and the way work gets done steadily and consistently and continuously to help facilitate improved communication, collaboration towards the end of, towards the goal of improved output. So they worked together, they looked at the environment setup process, they identified that there's a number of steps that comprise that process. They honed in on the provisioning data for the environments as being a key bottleneck. And they decided that there was an improvement opportunity that was revealed by that, which is that they might be able to only refresh the data as needed. And they could probably save 25% on the overall time through that. And they honed in also on the testing process. They decided that they could minimize the amount of manual testing they were doing. Also reduce 39%, the setup time by 39%. And again, further improvements that you can identify, targeted improvements, and this is something that within my organization we're actively doing. What can we do to systematically work through different parts of the process, one at a time, not trying to create endless bits of work, but targeting the main issues. What can we do to reduce the time for this, reduce the time for that, increase the reliability of this process and that process? So. Okay, and so the result of that is getting a sense of what are the improvement initiatives that you want to do. And so you start just by visualizing where could we make the improvements at a high level, what those are. And then the flow road mapping, as Steve showed earlier, a very simple way of laying out the variety of challenges. This is a simple importance versus feasibility matrix that we introduced in the book. Again, these are, we didn't make this up. We're borrowing prior art on this, but then organizing this into like a now, next, later structure so we can actually assign this to particular people to work on. And what's really most important is the follow-through. What makes these exercises valuable initially is that they identify the areas to work on, but it's only if you are able to systematically follow up on it that retrospectively these mapping exercises bring value. So it's funny that value is an interesting thing. The exercises will be valuable if you follow through on them. The value is achieved later in the process. So.
And so in this dynamic between Kim and Sharon, and the reason this is a story that we kind of see very often is that change is very seldom achievable in isolation, with one individual or one team. And we often have to reach across the organization to these other groups and bring them into alignment with us and cooperation with us to get anything done. So what we see in the Kim and Sharon case, and in a lot of these cases, we're able to come together and bring resources from Sharon's team to help Kim's team do what they need to do. Sharon's team has excess development capacity, especially because they can't move as fast as they need to. So their bottleneck can become Kim's team's opportunity. She can lend development expertise or testing expertise to Kim's team in order to co-create automation and better process that enables both teams to be less burdened and increase their viscosity and performance by working together to create these improvements. And they can do that by aligning and sharing the same view and sharing the same valued target.
Decrease the viscosity and increase the velocity. Yeah, so great.
And so what happens? You know, as a result of this collaboration between Kim and Sharon, they're saving 35% of their time in testing and validation of these environments, and then decreasing again the delays and handoffs that are present by these really targeted improvement efforts that are revealed by mapping and examining the current state flow, and then envisioning a better future state. And these are general improvements that you'll see, but this improved visibility and understanding, especially across functions and silos, less stress and cognitive load from these overburdened teams who all have their own backlogs to deal with, and then new ways to come together and align perspectives and get some traction, get out of the conversation space into the action space, and enable those steps for progress. And all of this is unlocking more time for innovation and improvement. We heard a lot about, you know, moonshots and all these big audacious things that we want to get done. To get there, we need to have efficient processes for taking those swings at the plate. And so this all helps us unlock more time for more iteration, more learning, and more progress. So overall, just to bring us through the start to finish, we are mapping a clear target outcome, understanding it very deeply from the start, looking at our current state flow. We look at dependencies that are impacting our constraints and having adverse effects on our flow. Then we're envisioning a better future state for that workflow across the organization, co-creating that with people who have real skin in the game and real impact on what's happening with these improvement efforts. And all this becomes actionable because we are road mapping it with measures of progress and ownership for everything that we're trying to get done, but across time horizons that are manageable and prevent us from trying to do everything at once or filing everything in a backlog that needs to be constantly reprioritized. So in effect, clarifying goals, we're identifying constraints, we're addressing those constraints, we are envisioning a better state, and then we are enabling a plan, do, study, act cycle for putting this into practice and getting actual results. And again, just to repeat it, and just because repetition is so valuable, this is the entire package of flow engineering, the entire complement. And you can read all about it in the book. And we hope you pick up a copy and work through this with your teams. And we also hope that you join us for the workshop tomorrow to put this into practice, because as we say, the best way to learn is by doing, and it turns out to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. It is. And we have ebooks, free ebooks available for anybody who's participating in the workshop tomorrow. We have a number of free ebooks in addition to the print books that are for those of you who got an animal in your sticker on your program. Just a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Any questions? A couple of questions here.
We have a question online. How do you handle situations where priorities get shifted from current work to something completely different, like pivoting to more revenue-generating features?
I mean, that's the nature of continuous change, right? So I think that's, I mean, there's no perfect answer to these things. If there's the possibility that your workflow is completely disrupted and you're redirected to something else, you know, there's no perfect answer to that. Obviously, when you're optimizing the throughput, one of the goals is to be able to deliver smaller batches of work more frequently, so you can actually get your work done in small increments, and you're not left with large amounts of work in progress that would be sacrificed if you have to totally redirect the team's attention to something else. But
another part of the reality of this practice is that we try to keep it very minimal for that very purpose. So as things change, you're not sacrificing a 4-day planning exercise, that you had to deliver off-site in a room and throw that out the window now that some new information has arisen, right? We're talking about, once you're past your initial learning, targeting 90 minutes for each of these workshops, and you often don't have to go back through the entire path once you've charted it the first time. You can go back to these maps, move them around. These are living documents, right? These maps don't get carved out in stone. They're part of canvases that can be manipulated as things change. So you can update them very easily in something like a retrospective or your sprint planning or, ad hoc. People can go into the map, change things around, send a notification. What if we did things this way? Or what if, I created another version of this? You can copy these, you can share them digitally very easily. And so, the cost of disruption is very low because there's lower investment than a lot of these really intensive practices that take a lot of time and coordination.
Any questions in the room?
Question here in the room, yeah.
Thank you, Christine again. So question in their use case, I really love that Sharon and Kim is collaborating together and sharing the resources. In that use case, how do you see them? They probably already have 2 different sprint teams. They have their sprint planning. How do you see them kind of actually changing that flow? I know we have like a lot of teams that's running sprint scrum every 2 weeks, product managers, they already have like backlogs of backlogs of backlogs. How do you kind of like figure it out within this use case?
I think, that is, it's very challenging to reconcile our prior obligations with what we want to do next, right? And fit things in. Part of the justification for investment in something like flow engineering is if we step away from the work for a little amount of time, we're talking about these 90-minute stretches, that we're going to unlock an increased capacity to do more and tackle more of this backlog that we're faced with. But another aspect of this is the opportunity to step away and reestablish what is valuable often gives us this lens to now look at the backlog and say, well, 50% of this has nothing to do with what we're actually trying to do. And we're missing that measuring stick. We're missing that reference point that keeps all that stuff on the backlog or keeps it ordered the way that it's ordered. So by revisiting, what are we really trying to accomplish? What's most important? We can often free up a lot of what we thought we were obligated to or what we thought was very important. And so how this happens in practice is, pairing between these 2 teams, not 100% to 100%, but maybe 20% to 20%, where you say, okay, well, we just had this person on vacation, they're now back. Instead of diving into the backlog, they're going to go work with Kim's team for 2 sprints to deliver this one very specific target outcome that's going to really accelerate our capacity. And as a team, we're going to be moving 30% faster after 2 weeks of this target on the constraint, right? Like, because we're working specifically on the constraint that's slowing the whole team down, when we unlock that capacity, we're benefiting the entire flow. And that's just, then that waste and delay gets reinvested again. And this is a lot like, classic economical investing. You reinvest your profits and everything starts to ramp up, right? So we take the waste, transform it into unlocked capacity, and we can start to trade on that time and invest it a little bit more strategically than trying to squeeze every minute out of the existing schedule with the backlog that we have. It's It's not easy. You know, the negotiation is hopefully assisted by this shared visibility and like coming together to share an understanding of what helps you and what helps me and what helps us together. And one of the things that we talk about in the book is, you know, a common North Star that we can say, well, this is important to me, this is important to you, this is important to both of us. And so in service of that thing, we're able to come together on the same page and say, okay, if I give this and you give this, together, you know, that capacity could unlock a better workflow for both of us. This is really not a solution for that, but steps you can take in that direction.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're going to turn it back over to John to say some closing statements. Correct. There he is.
Hey, John.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
Hey. Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to Steve, Andrew, and Courtney for this amazing session. Hope to see you all tomorrow for the workshop. You know, looking forward to it. And, you know, have a great day. This has been great. Thank you all.
Partners, any of you that may have your schedule that has a sticker on it, please come see us in the back of the room so we can get you a copy of your book.